Check.
All right, so a lot
happened.
A lot has happened since we last recorded.
I went to Georgia.
You went to Georgia.
We did all kinds of work out down there. And
you were also in D.C.
I went to D.C. right before right after
the events happened.
But
the insurrection, when Vikings raided our holy places.
It's an interesting. The way the language worked out for that is interesting. Everyone kind of coalesced and then started defending language the way they did, especially there's obviously a spontaneous phenomena where everyone was just using language and then deciding what language they like the best. But the use of the word insurrection every time makes me cringe pretty hard.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's really hard to imagine an insurrection in America, a serious one, like an actual one, that doesn't include actual guns. Yeah.
Well,
because if you wanted to, you just bring guns. Like if that's what a thing that you wanted to do, you would bring firearms, I would assume.
Yeah.
It'd be a heck of a lot easier than...
Well, if anything that's demonstrated to me, it's how easy it is to actually just walk into the Capitol.
I don't know if that's true. It's so weird because, I forgot about this, but I remember during the Kavanaugh hearings, there was some disruptions at a lot of the
Women's March raided the Capitol.
Office buildings, that surrounding it. And that's an interesting... it's not a whataboutism. It's just if you're just trying to honestly engage with the content of what's happening right now, and you're thinking... Man, what is going on right now? How do I understand what the actual event that occurred is without referencing historical things that have happened?
I hate people using whataboutisms as some fallacy. It is 100% a useful way of exposing hypocrisy.
Well, yeah, it's just that hypocrisy is less important than ethics, than the overall ethical thing, right? So here's the thing. Here's what's a good criticism. It's a good criticism if you say, therefore, it's justified. Of course it's not justified. It's political violence. All political violence is terrible and bad, and we shouldn't do it. We should engage with ideas, not with our fists. That's ethics, right? Yeah. So, if you use it to justify it, yeah, I agree. There's a criticism on the whataboutism. But otherwise, how do you understand it without the other historical context around protests at the Capitol?
There's a reason why I'm going to say this over and over again during this recording, because one, I think it's funny, but two, there's a reason why I say this, that Vikings raided our holy sites, is because all of this is religious.
Yeah.
We've been undergoing riots and political violence for en masse over the last year, but it's been exponentially increasing for the last 5 years, and we're all supposed to just pretend like that's not been happening,
right?
And the only reason why this one seems to be a big deal to me is because you violated the Capitol building,
right?
It's the sacredness of the democracy, right?
Well, it is.
This is the religious narrative.
It did expose the commonality of where everyone does agree that there is a limit to political violence, where everyone will suddenly come in and condemn. The difference is in the Women's March thing, nobody died. There's a difference.
But it was Capitol Police that did the shootings on this one. It wasn't.
Right.
It wasn't like
who died from heart attacks, and things like that, accidents.
Yeah, it's not. It wasn't actually like they went in and started lynching senators or something right. But that's kind of how you're supposed to envision it,
right?
In current narrative, right?
That's what the word insurrection
suggests.
It's like when I forget who it was, a Russian general started shelling the Capitol building. That's not the same thing as what we're talking about with what happened this week, which to me was a really twisted full expression of the kind of street battle LARPing political violence we've seen. That's really accelerated. I mean, it's been around since the midway through the Obama
it's just
years.
So we're doing this. This is Tuesday, the 19th of January, right? That we're recording right now.
Right.
Yesterday there was massive riots across many major cities for MLK Day, with plenty of injuries and deaths that happened. We're not talking about that.
I didn't even know that happened.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
See, that's what I'm getting at.
I also been really busy. I haven't been keeping track of the news cycle as much as usual.
The news cycle's not talking about it.
Really?
There's just a few sources where you're going to see this. It's cops got injured, protesters got injured, whatever.
Yeah.
There's a bunch that happened in New York. It's just nobody's talking about that. It's because that's not convenient.
Yeah.
Like, that's all it comes down to.
That is true. I mean, and that's part of that red pill phenomena, like recognizing that the what appears to be a media narrative at a time is actually constructed and intentionally and purposefully by people in the media, like by individual actors who are trying to shape the way public opinion works. That doesn't mean it's a conspiracy. That's just how the media works. That is that isn't to conspiracize or to say that there's a single actor or that everyone is the same in these places or that everyone's necessarily bad who's doing that. Everyone in these positions think they're doing the right thing for the public good. The other thing is like the
okay, for the public good. I don't know if that's like totally. Sometimes yes, but sometimes it's out of their own good also. Like it's like
which would serve as the larger public good. I don't think they're thinking always. I'm taking from other people to benefit myself.
Not always. Well, the psychology there is questionable.
Right.
Like sometimes it might be for like a larger ideological picture, but also sometimes it's because I make money off of clicks.
Yeah,
like and that has nothing to do with the public.
Yeah, but they don't think it is. It obviously isn't injuring the public good. I'm not saying they're all well motivated, but they definitely.
Oh yeah, most people aren't
visualizing this as like
most people aren't
super
like,
villain.
Yeah, most people aren't sitting here like, what can I do?
That's my point.
That's my point. But that also doesn't mean that their intentions are for the public good. That doesn't also mean
but if you ask them, they would say that.
Yeah, sure.
Right.
Yeah, actions and speech are different things. Of
course, right. So therefore, all I'm saying is like their motivations, if you ask them, is going to be, I'm doing this for the right reasons, I'm doing this because I'm trying to do this.
We're saving democracy.
Yeah, like, or saying true things, or speaking truth to power, or opposing misinformation, or lots of those sorts of things. Anyways, but the point I was trying to get to was the way the LARP turned into something that got really dark and violent with the Capitol Police in this case is an interesting story to me because this isn't a thing that we've seen a lot on the right at all. Like other than Michigan, like the plot to abduct the governor, things like that. And then it's suddenly kind of going this way, which was very concerning. There's an escalation of violence.
There were FBI antagonists in that thing.
Absolutely,
too.
That's an interesting story too, especially from the libertarians' perspective, because libertarians have been working on this issue of intelligence agencies basically setting people up and then capturing them by
there was entrapment,
giving them the means, the motive, all of the things. Well, maybe except for the motive, and then taking someone in and then getting the win. The point being that there's this escalation of violence going on, and I don't see any responding like, okay, no self-reflection from the left to say like, oh man, what have we done to encourage the situation? It's just pure, the right wing has gone too far and violated our sacred spaces. And that's disturbing to me. But it's also like,
it shouldn't be surprising.
Yes, but it also wasn't so bad. Like we're saying, there could have been guns brought. There could have things like that. Although pipe bombs, I don't know if that was ever confirmed. So I think we're still waiting on investigations.
There's a lot of stuff.
Been more violent.
And there's a lot of stuff floating around the narrative that like the FBI's primary concern before inauguration is to detect pipe bombs and stuff like. And they're already like prepping the narrative.
But my suspicion is that a lot of the people that we're talking about, when you watch the videos, are thinking they're doing the LARPing thing, right?
Yeah.
The live action role playing, where they're doing a revolution, and their goal is just to show up, and Q is going to show up, and something's going to happen, and then Donald Trump will win. Like there wasn't a clear. Also,
most
mission.
People in there were just being swept up in the crowd. Like there's a few people that are antagonizing things that are trying to break down barriers and stuff like that. Yeah. It's not like there was like a large swell of people that were all just like, yeah, we're going into the Capitol. We're taking this. Like, no, that was a very small amount of people.
Well, I think people underestimate the madness of crowds phenomena when it comes to that. And they underestimate how much of that spontaneously happens, right? Where it's just like, you're there, you're kind of there to LARP, you're kind of there for the thrill. You want to fight the bad guys, and then all of a sudden people are going into the Capitol. You're like, well, I won't go to the Capitol.
That's what because and you see that in a lot of the videos where people are just like, oh, look at where we are.
And that's what it reminds me about. If everyone remembers, was it a year ago or 2 years ago when Area 50 when we tried when the internet decided to storm Area 51? This is a lot like that for a lot of
very much so,
right. So you had in that Capitol crowd violence thing, you had people who were legitimately there to mess with Congress, right? To abduct congressmen, maybe to steal stuff, who are like bad motivated actors from the right. Two, there probably were agent provocateurs from the left. Why do I think this? Well, there's been very credible accusations, although some of them were very uncredible. But two, that's what, if I was a left-wing anarchist who had just been running, campaigns to draw violence for political means for the last year,
the incentives,
of course I would do that.
Well,
right? and then put on a QAnon shirt and then go about like doing crazy things.
Well, there's going to be multiple factions on any of these major events.
Yes,
it's like that events like this shape history.
Yeah,
Archduke Ferdinand being assassinated by basically nobodies, by just like small militia group, basically like small terrorist group, basically shaped the 20th century.
Right.
Like that started World War I, which left a ripple effect of multiple different things that happened across the world over that time. So it's just like the idea of like this just being because of a normal mob is like, think a little deeper. There might be more variables at play here, different groups that are wanting to different things, and you capture the moment. Right?
And the third one being most of the people there are just there to LARP. There to have fun.
Most people are there
to fight the system, to show up and protest, and who are probably well motivated by desires of country and philosophy and things like that they wanted to see.
99% of people are there to LARP.
That's my guess. Yeah. That would be my guess. I don't know. That
would be my guess.
When you watch the videos, it is interesting to me just to what degree how many people were like, I love the video where she was like, it didn't happen. They didn't let us in. We were gonna do a revolution, and she was like, "Lady, what are you like?" The person saying that is an interesting case study into the psychology of the people that we're talking about, because none of that is conservative. There's no conservatism in that philosophy. Donald Trump isn't necessarily conservative, so that makes sense. But it's that thing where people are suddenly just kind of all dealing in the same currency of rhetorical political language, and that is, some of the best evidence I've seen of my idea for the Newtonian rules of politics. If you introduce language or an idea, it creates its equal and opposite reaction. So if you say we're going to have a socialist revolution in America, we're going to take it to the streets and do 90 days of fire back in the Obama administration, that creates the equal and opposite reaction of a conservative nationalist pushback to say no, that to stand up against that, and they will use the same language. The only difference is the people who are doing, in my mind, are the people who are using the already existing structures to and redeeming and improving them rather than trying to revolutionize them, or people who are advocating for values that don't have that equal and opposite pushback because it's a true value, like love everyone.
Well, it's also like there's a little perspective I think to be gained from this. When you look at major events that have happened throughout history, all of history, like name whatever event, like large scale, rioting, protesting, large scale movements like this, they usually look like this. It's not whatever you fantasize in a history class, like whether it's the Tea Party or like riots back in Rome or whatever. Like they look like what we saw at the Capitol building. Like people are like there's like a energy that kind of forms, and like I don't know exactly how you would describe it, but there's like this energy that kind of forms over a crowd that just kind of like, and various people will try to capture that energy and use it for their political gains, like or whatever moment that they're in history. I think that we're seeing more and more of that happen now. Like as things are becoming more distorted, more polarized, we're just seeing people that are trying to manipulate the energy of the crowd into various pockets for whatever they're trying to purpose. It might be for some, like it might be like the globalists, or it might be, like right-wing populists or whatever. They're all trying to capture something,
right?
And there's sentiment that goes various different ways.
And that's like the realpolitik interpretation of a lot of this stuff, is that a lot of people who are in these are motivated specifically to advance a certain set of political goals. That doesn't mean they're wrong, right? But that's what everyone is doing when they're doing politics. And it's the naivety that is kind of built into our system to encourage this religious conception that politics is actually just like pure art,
Yeah.
where everyone is just doing, is just engaging on the same set of rules and the same set of like foundational principles, and that's just not true. A lot of people are coming at it from radically different points of view, and their range of tools that they use are also radically different. And one of the things that I've seen consistently through this is the right try to adopt tactics of the left that the left has used successfully over the years, and then having it blow up in their face pretty terrific.
Well, and what's probably the primary reason for that? It's because they don't have the institutions and the corporate backing. It's
Some of that or incompetence.
Yeah. Could be incompetence.
Yeah.
It seems to be more
Donald Trump losing Georgia is probably, from a political science point of view, probably because he failed to encourage people to turn in their absentee ballots, because he said the absentee ballot system is foundationally corrupt and ineffective. What that did was discourage people from turning in their absentee ballots. That is utilizing a left-wing tactic, aka conspiracizing about like how voting works. So something that the left has used for a very long time is to say that anytime you try to have voter integrity laws, that is a racial code for Jim Crow, and anyone who disagrees with you on that is just trying to reinstitute Jim Crow. That's obviously false. It's a character assassination. It's a terrible tactic, right? Donald Trump tried to adopt that tactic and put his own spin on it, and it blew up in his face. It made him lose an election he was inclined to win.
Well, but you also saw in right-wing circles there was quite a bit of talk in right-wing circles of wanting the Republicans to lose to teach them a lesson. Like there's also a lot of that.
There's some of that. I don't know if that scales though. I think that happens.
I mean, when you're seeing like major commentators saying that, it's just like people that have 30 million people that listen to them.
Yeah.
Who knows how much that scales?
Right.
Like there's a lot of different variables that go into all these things. It's hard to have like a reductionist attitude of like what was the. I mean, it's easy to have a reductionist attitude, but it's
obviously it's multi-causal.
Yeah, there's always multiple variables in all these things.
But the question is, what is the biggest variable, and what are the biggest variables that could have been different if people made different strategic decisions? Right, and in both of those, like teaching Republicans a lesson is a terrible idea if what you're trying to do is keep, I don't know, a $15 minimum wage from happening, all these different policies.
Yeah, but like a lot.
But
of
if you're an accelerationist, what you want to do is give the left everything they want so that they can screw it up so that you can then have your revolution.
And there seems to be some of that, but also I think there's a large sentiment. This is in the kind of like the Trump base of the Republican Party, which is most of the Republican Party now. Like Trump has very much captured the Republican Party. The Trump base of like the populace, their sentiment is that the Republicans are basically no good anyways. They're going to sit there and block very small things, but when it comes to the big things, it doesn't even matter. Like that's what their sentiment is. Right. So when they're looking at like Georgia, they're just kind of like, doesn't even matter anymore, which might be just a nihilistic attitude that people have, right?
Well, and it's also deeply influenced by influencers, by people who are exercising political influence to try to build their own policy majorities for them across lots of different issues. Like it's funny if you dig into the facts of that case, and it's just crazy, right? Because it's both true that like it's so funny to me because like people understand the politics once they're explained it. But most people have a vision of how things work in DC that is so far removed from the reality that it's impossible to get someone like caught up unless you have those intermediaries actually doing their job, which they haven't, I don't think, at all in the last, since Bush. Because almost all the policy majority questions that we have when it comes to passing legislation in D.C., you need 60 votes. Almost no one's had 60 votes, except for the Democrats for a relatively short time in the first couple of years of Obama. Yeah. That's why they got the wins that they did. Hello.
Well, and now, so post-Capitol storming, which still just, it's so wild that like this month has just been wild.
Yeah, I like Capitol storming better than I do Insurrection for sure. Coup is even the worst.
Coup is the more
painful.
That's an interesting one, especially when we're seeing everything that's happened over the last 4 years with the Russia collusion stories and stuff like that. You know, it's fascinating to see the whole coup thing being main narrative. But so we saw. Well, so I was just going to say, we saw Trump got impeached again, which is basically a symbolic gesture, right?
Right.
Like, it doesn't really mean anything, like in the terms of like the mechanics of politics.
There are all kinds of arguments been generated for why it's meaningful, but I'm very skeptical
because it's about a tarnishing of a legacy, right?
Right.
Like that's it's
to
all
keep him from ever
all
running
symbolism.
for president again or something like that.
Or just send a message to future right-wing populists.
Yeah.
Right.
Which future right-wing populist is going to look like, oh man, they impeached him twice, therefore I'm not going to run. I mean, it's like
but because
not how psychology
well, because
works.
Donald Trump's life post-presidency is going to be a bit hellish.
Yeah.
We're already seeing like banks are refusing to work with him,
right.
Which is things I've been predicting for years now is what we're going to start seeing.
Right.
But
kind of like the cultural shibboleth.
You have golf courses that are refusing to work with him.
Right.
Like you know,
right.
it's
so kind of putting him into like this gray space where no one will do business.
We are seeing what is it? Momentario damnatio or whatever. There's a old Latin phrase for this of erasing historical figures from history. We're beginning to see that type of thing right now, right?
Yeah, I think it's a thing of the moment, and then it'll go away as the reputation does. I mean, like there was a point in the Bush era, you would have thought, like in like 2006, you would have thought that the Bush regime meant that no serious person could ever have that name again in politics. And then Jeb Bush was back a little while later, almost getting the Republican nomination for a couple months.
And who dismantled the Bush legacy?
Well, Trump. But that isn't that's not the point, right? Yeah. The point is that like there was a time when that relation with that reputation hit seemed impossible to determine.
Not within Republicans.
Within time. Oh yeah, dude.
Not fully, I would say. Yeah. Like the neocons still had a large control over the Republican Party.
Amongst the
like it's
general
it's
public,
not the same thing as like a right-wing populist.
Well,
I wouldn't compare it in the same way.
Amongst the general public and amongst Republicans in 2006. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. It would have been hard to imagine. And of course we don't get the same kind of blowback as what Trump has. I'm just saying over time over the next 10
what
years,
I'm saying, I'm not even talking about the politics of like elections. Like it's regardless of if Trump ran in 2024 or whatever, or Don Jr. or whatever.
Right.
Like it's more so this is going to be trouble for you and your family going forward, and this is the message that is being sent to future people that are going to go against that seems to be what symbolism is to me.
Are you advocating the idea that this is a coordinated thing, or that it's a spontaneous set of things where everyone's responding the same way to the same set of cultural incentives?
I'm not saying that it's necessarily like coordinated, like there's like a figure at the top of it that's just being like George Soros just being, now we got him. Like I'm not saying that.
Yeah.
Like in the same way where I was saying with when we see a lot of these movements that happen, that there's like a spirit that captures it. Like I'm a Jungian when it comes to the end, which would take me forever to unpack exactly what I'm saying here. But when I'm talking about there being like this collective psychology of ideas that are kind of at battle with each other, there's like a spirit that's almost taking over people that. Like that's how I'm viewing
that people are participating
like on a psychological level.
Yeah. When you say take over, it freaks people out. That people are participating in. You know that people are saying, and they're responding, or another way to put it is responding to a certain set of incentives.
There's a large group of people that are being captured or like possessed by ideas. Yeah, like that's what I'm viewing it as. Right. Like anybody that's listened to Jordan Peterson has heard him use this Jungian phrase before, being possessed by ideas. But that's what I'm saying. Right. But there are people that do try to manipulate those things for their own gains. Like it's not like this is all spontaneous, but it's not like this is all coordinated. Like there's like a mixture of the two. That's how I'm viewing things.
So yes, I'm on board with that. Yeah. So to me, a lot of it is responding to how do I make sure that when I go to a dinner party after January, the people that I see at that dinner party will be like, oh yeah, he's a good guy. He did that thing, to stick it to the Trump guy,
But what do you mean?
So if you're Deutsche Bank, some of it could be like, we want to reduce our liability of working with this dude because and they've been planning this for years or months or whatever. And they just took this opportunity to come out looking like they did a good thing amongst the people they have cocktail parties with. Because no one actually cares. Like no one's like, normal people in Germany or international businessmen in the world are like, oh man, now I can do business with Deutsche Bank because they dropped Trump. Like they didn't even know in the first place. It was a way to get social credit.
Well, it's a similar thing when we're saying like, like people get deplatformed because of advertisers.
Right.
Like at the end of the day, most people really don't care.
Right.
But that's the excuse that's used.
Right.
Like it's the same type of concept, right? So it's like what is actually going
Yeah.
on there? But it's much more of like I would have to get way too deep into like psychology to fully describe this, I think. But it's much more like there's like it's like a religious fervor of like, what team are we all part of? What are we all kind of as a collective working towards in this like project that we call humanity, and what direction that we're going? I think it's much more zoom out like that than it is just being like, oh, now we can get good business deals. Like I think that's how most people tend to operate, and that's kind of where they're getting their dopamine kicks from and stuff like that.
It's about what tribe they're identifying with and how to get social credit within that tribe. And that
even that I think is maybe zoomed in a little too much for what seems to be happening on a psychological level.
Right.
But like, I can recommend books that talk about this.
To take it back a step, I totally agree that there's a certain set of incentives that people are responding to them, that there's like a cultural battle going on about kind of what is the future of the country and trying to make some ideas unacceptable.
It's not even the country. I think this is about the future of like global humanity, because we become so globalized, right?
That's a good point. And I think there has been a lot of connections that I think people would recognize those connections between, you know, what's going on in France with Macron to what went on with Brexit, with Trump, et cetera, et cetera. That has been sliced and diced a gazillion times over the last 4 years.
I think often our analysis is too much focused on just what's happening in America.
Right.
When we're talking about these things, when we're talking about like global leaders that are obviously like, we're in all of these like international agreements and we're all trying to move into different directions. Like I think things like it's not always just about like what's happening in America. It's like America is a large piece of this pie that's happening, but it is very much like extend the analysis to what's happening in the West.
Let me get you a great piece of evidence for that. After George Floyd's killing, there were protests in Britain.
Yep. There's been protests all around the world on the Trump stuff with the Capitol storming as well.
Yeah. Right. So I saw coverage of it, but I never really got a satisfactory like, this is why. Because they don't have the same history that our country does.
Also Americans were very invested in the Brexit movement.
Also that, which is an interesting phenomenon too. Where at least a subset of Americans were heavily invested in.
Politically interested Americans were very invested in the Brexit.
Because they have a vision for society, and they apply that vision to Britain and all that kind of stuff, even given like a lack of context.
Which is like, which in a lot of ways, I think a lot of this comes down to centralization versus decentralization of like how we view society. Do we want to have this big centralized structure, or do we want to have a more decentralized where we're able to have our own pocketed communities, states, etc.? Like, are we all in this together, or are we able to kind of do our own thing and continue to trade with each other? Like that seems to be what the dynamic globally is.
Right.
And it seems to be a big dividing line. That's not just like Republicans versus Democrats. I think it goes deeper than that. I'm seeing that is a dividing line culturally speaking among libertarians. I'm seeing that as a dividing line all over the place. And that it might be too reductionist, but it's something like that of like where we see society moving is the centralization aspect.
How can an individual participate meaningfully in that without? How should people orientate themselves to that dialogue? You think?
What do you mean by that?
Like if you're a well-meaning person, you see society feeling like it's coming apart the way it is in all these different dimensions of people pulling apart. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Should people feed into that? Should people?
I think it's a good thing that we're pulling apart because I want to see things decentralized. So
to me, it's what maximizes peace, right? And what I worry about is people. My biggest fear is the person who thinks they know what's best for everyone. That applies also to the kind of revolutionaries who believe they know what's better for your political ambitions and they agree with me on my principles, right? So they generally I think the more dispersed political power, the better. The more decentralization that you have in society, where you have interest groups competing against one another, rather than one having an uber dominant position, is almost better for the average person in that society, and better for political liberty, and better for individual rights and things like that. That said, there are a certain set of people who are so convinced by their ideas that they're willing to risk other people's lives to accomplish them. And those people I can't endorse. I can't get behind them. I want to separate myself from them, because to me, what isn't important about separation or divorce or whatever you might say is centralization or decentralization is that it's done peacefully first.
Oh yeah, I would always much prefer that things are done peacefully. Yeah. I'm not convinced. Like, this is something we both listen to a decent amount of, like Michael Malice. He's often somebody that's talking about like the peaceful divorce of the states. It seems like there's much more energy moving towards that idea. Like if we were to talk about even bring up the idea of secession a few years ago, it would be like a wild thing, like that nobody would even consider. But that's something that's much more as like part of people's minds of like, this could be where we're heading. And that is the more peaceful option, like from a legal perspective, rather than civil war. Like that is the more peaceful option.
And that's my fear, is that there's this there's a sense that and I would say this to everybody involved. If you are really concerned about the maintenance of the status quo with international institutions or countries or whatever, you should consider the cost that you're making other people pay to get your worldview, which is violence, right? Well, and a great example of this that I think a lot of left wingers who probably disagree with us about decentralization would think is, look at Hong Kong. That is a centralization effort. That is to try to take people who speak the same language and have the same ethnic background and make them one giant mob with China, right? That is the problem. That is an effort of coherence amongst a people group. That's a problem, right? What we want to see is to lower those political lines, allow Hong Kong to be Hong Kong and China to be China, and everyone be okay, because that's what makes everyone better off. Hong Kong can't allow that because their political philosophy China can't allow that. So the CCP can't allow that because their political philosophy requires a coherence of people group, of the Chinese people, of the Chinese effort, experiment, the nation state of China, and the greater Asian, power structure that they're trying to create.
Well, it's imperialism, right?
Right.
Like at the end of the day,
but recognize that is the same idea as the thing that makes you say, I can't have decentralization because people might choose things that I don't like.
Yep, and that seems to be the primary drive of a lot of these divisions that I'm seeing. Like when it comes to, like, I've ranted about libertarians on this podcast before.
Yeah. Many times.
But this to me seems to be the division between me and other libertarians, and in a lot of ways where I feel like libertarianism is leaving me. Like, I haven't abandoned. Like, I'm still like a Rothbardian, right? I haven't changed being a Rothbardian, but I'm seeing libertarians move in this direction. And I've been saying this like since we've known each other for years. Yeah. I've been saying this since 2017. I saw this. I would see this division was growing and growing and growing. But it seems to be is that there's either the ones that tend to be a little bit more sympathetic to the right-wing populists and kind of what's going on, sympathetic, like not fully endorsing, like that's kind of where I am. I'm sympathetic towards it. And then there's the ones that are kind of more sympathetic to the neoliberal political establishment, which are trying to like much more centralize society into like this cultural vision that they have. And that seems to be the dividing line that I'm having. But I'm not just like, it's just I know libertarians, so that's why I'm using them as an example. But I'm seeing it just kind of across all over the place in all different spectrums.
Oh yeah, you got like California who wants to secede from the union. You have Chaz, which is a secession effort.
Chaz is a secession effort, right?
Etc. All of those things that are coming across. Lots of
we don't all have to sit here and play. And this is why I'm such a big cryptocurrency advocate and stuff like that. Yeah. Is because that's just a decentralization of currency.
So
right?
to me, I think there's a hubris. So my approach on this stuff is I tend to stay neutral across what the right idea is. I try to say how should we orientate the way we think about this first, And the way I tend to think about it is, I already detailed, one is the peace. Second is beware of hubris. A tremendous amount of people get into moments like this. They get into that religious fervor and they think they know things they don't know.
Yep.
So they start doing things that are horrendous and against their own principles. And then three, like method to me is less important than the kind of results that it actually creates for society. So like to me, if we can get to a place of greater peace, mutual benefit, cooperation, and
isn't peace kind of your method though?
And equal rights.
That seems to be a very important thing to you.
Exactly, right?
You said it's less important, so I'm just...
No. Like the method being to create peace, right? So if the method is more decentralization, we draw down the power of the federal government, that's usually been my MO.
Yeah,
right?
I think that's the best way to maximize peace.
But don't get me wrong. At other times, incorporation doctrine being a great example, where centralization of power against the state's own interest has been embodied in large centralized institutions like the World Trade Organization, which isn't that large or powerful, but it is abstract and distant from the general public. It's a very elite institution that have done really, really good things for the general public and for that. Like we did an episode a while ago about either revolutionizing those institutions, of completely tearing them down and restarting them, or in redeeming them. In between those two methods, I don't care. As long as what we're doing is we're supporting the things that are compatible with those principles and doing that. So if we want to rework the UN, I'm on board. Let's do it. If we want to rework the federal government, I'm on board. Let's do it. If we want to dissolve these things, okay. But what do you replace them with? What do you think? How do you think about how to reorganize human institutions? Because there's some things that we probably can't roll back from, such as globalism, the international division of labor, concepts like that are foundational forces that you can't stop. And I worry about that a lot of people who are engaging in this space and are very convinced of their point of view, both from the institutionalist point of view too. I think a lot of those people just lack imagination,
Yeah.
And we're just like, whatever exists, I must support because it's what exists.
Yeah, completely.
Which is exactly why you lose.
Yeah.
No positive vision.
I think a lack of imagination is often one of the critical elements because you and I are pretty radical in some of the things that we believe and what's possible for society and things like that. But if you were just to say some of these things, when it comes down to it, just but that could never be done. It's like, right. Okay, a lot of things in history could have never been done, right? Until they happened. Like the American Revolution should have never been done. Like where we went with the Articles of Confederation and the Bill of Rights, the Constitution and stuff like that. Like none of that should have really ever been done, but somehow we got there.
Right. So if you were to say, like, David, we're going to do an Article 5 convention and we're going to get together and we're going to pass a resolution from the states to restrain the federal government in XYZ ways. Balanced budget amendment, a right to earn a living, I don't know, like something that reformed monetary policy, et cetera, and then said that's going to be the effort. I'll be like, have at it, buddy.
I'm so skeptical of using of using Article 5 because of the can of worms that it could potentially open.
It could go wrong.
I'd be so worried for
that's
where it
that's
could
exactly
happen.
the kind of conservative approach to that is like, to me, if you have a good strategy where you've detailed out why you think you can win and then go making a shot, I'm pretty comfortable with that.
Yeah, no, it's like there could be a lot of good
risk. That's lower risk than trying to than an armed rebellion in Michigan, where you
but also at the end of the day,
or something like that.
Okay, you change the Constitution. What does that change in the end of the day? Who cares about the Constitution anymore? We stopped caring about the Constitution 200 years ago.
In a sense, that's true. In a sense, that's untrue. Right.
So it's used as a political weapon to bully your opponents if you need to.
And also, the court process itself has been advantageous in defending rights and things like that too.
Also taking them away.
Whenever it's convenient. Whenever political pressure is strong enough, aka Japanese internment,
And one of my favorite things, and this is just to make fun of my conservative friends, I usually do, is that always remind conservatives that the Constitution was used to centralize power.
Oh yeah.
It was always that was the purpose of the Constitution, was to centralize authority.
Yeah, that's always been an interesting lesson for my friends on the right, who are well-meaning, who are trying to say what they just confuse an ought with an is. Yeah. That's what they're doing. They're saying this is what government ought to be, and it should be this very limited vision that I believe a proper interpretation of the Constitution would result in.
Well,
and then they say what it is, and then they start talking about what is, and they're like, that's why it shouldn't be that way. And it's like, yeah, I'm sorry, buddy, that's not the field of play. And it hasn't been the field of play in a very long time.
And this is why like the Garrett's book, The Revolution That Was such an important book, because it just outlines revolution already occurred.
Yeah, the managerial revolution is what you mean.
Well, that's James Burnham's, but it's echoing the same sentiment.
Yeah,
is that the revolution already happened? Like, and we have to understand the point in history that we're in right now if we're going to effectively battle
just in case people missed the last episode, which wasn't very good. So sorry, everybody. Just in case people missed that, why don't we just run through that real fast? What are those theories, and what revolution are you talking about?
Okay, so. Most people generally know what the progressive era was, starting in the 1880s, 1890s. You got Teddy Roosevelt, Woodrow Wilson that kind of come out of it, and the progressive push that existed that really radically changed America. 1913 is where we get some of the biggest policy changes that really set the tone for the 20th century. Federal Reserve Act, income tax, direct vote of senators. You got a major structural change on how society is run in America. But then you also have World War I with wartime taxes that get popped up and all of these things.
War socialism.
War socialism. Yeah. There's a point in time where the income tax went up to like 93% on the top bracket at that time. At that point in time, which is absurd. Like it went from like 5% to 93% just like that. But with all that happened, the conception is what came out of that. So we were kind of historically in this battle that was much more of like a libertarian capitalism versus like a left-wing socialism. Like that's kind of where America was before that time. But when those forces kind of collided during the World War I, World War II era, we ended up coming with there was a revolution that occurred, and it wasn't the capitalists didn't really win and the socialists didn't really win, like the Marxist types. They didn't really win. The institutions kind of formalized into a new system, which is a much more of like a Mussolini style fascism. It's not completely there, but just for conceptualizing.
Managed capitalism.
And it's managed capitalism.
Or what Mises called interventionism.
Yeah, interventionism, was exactly how the Austrians would put it. But so you end up having exactly that, managed capitalism, which is in a lot of ways the fascist vision. Is like it's kind of like socialists at the top while you're managing the rules of the game for society, and then you have like free markets underneath it. And a lot of like the corporate nature of America, globalized society right now has really kind of mimicked this model. And so like we're still fighting these capitalist versus socialist battles right now, but that's not really like that fight happened already. Like when and I think this is where a lot of the sentiment and the resentment towards like the managerial class, the establishment, the tech elites, the like all these people, that's where the new battle is manifesting, and it's a pushback of the managerial revolution, as James Burnham would say.
So rather than, and like to describe the system a little bit clearer, rather than having a complete nationalization of industry, rather than having, although there were quite a bit of that back then.
There was quite a bit.
And we've stepped away from that consistently over time and continued to do so, right? Because of forces of right-wingers making cases and winning political battles. And then on top of that, it was like that you could have more entrepreneurship. You could actually have people create new products. You would have a permissiveness in creating new goods and services. But if you got large enough that you rose to the level where you had an interest, the state had an interest in you, you were then to be commanded and managed by the state. And then what that turned into was the fourth branch of government, which is the administrative state.
Yeah.
The administrative state is what we talk about when we say like the Montana Code annotated would be something for Montana. The federal code is what is the millions and millions of lines of text that guide administrative states, the Department of Health and Human Services, the Department of Education, the Department of Agriculture, etc., follow to regulate everyone's life. Now, it's an important thing that people don't understand. Before the progressive era, that didn't exist.
No, not at all.
The only thing that governed your life was the legislative code, meaning what legislators passed and it was adopted and then executed by the executive branch. Mm-hmm. So the difference in there and what the amount of rules that existed in society were orders of magnitude less, because it's a lot easier to pass a rule without any democratic processes through administrative state and then manage society and manage the economy that way. And then two, it was a massive growth in corporatism that everyone hates and despises, but is so ubiquitous everywhere because the entire system is built to facilitate that corporatism. Because and for a lot of it, it's like common sense reasons, right? Like if you're going to manage airlines, who's the best people to employ to manage airlines? Former airline people, right? So then you have your administrative code written by people who are already bought into the existing system of airlines, and then the system starts to cannibalize itself in that corporatism that is supposed to just kind of guide the general direction or make sure that the capitalism is serving the public interest. I'm trying to be fair to their arguments. I don't think it actually does that, but that's their argument.
Steel manning it. Instead,
begins to feed itself on the bodies of its own entrepreneurs. It starts creating so much code that no one can start new businesses. There's too much risk. And you start getting real problems with finance capitalism, where everyone just puts their money into investment rather than to startups. And I think that's one of the biggest reasons why we have this slowdown of startups in the atom space, and we have this massive growth of startups in the idea space and in the media space and in the information space, because that risk in the material space is so enormous because there's so much code written there, while in these other spaces it's not. So the managerial revolution is in this like life cycle, I think, of growth where everyone's kind of all consolidated that it's the right idea, and then where we're at now where people are like, man, should we have health boards? Because they're kind of tyrannical, right? Like that's the dialogue going on right now in the Montana State Capitol. It's things like that. And the question is how, and once you kind of flip that on its head, that's a description of the past. The question is, what should the future look like? Well, what is the world that we should advocate for?
And because the is right now that I would say, what's evolved out of that is very much this like technocratic tyranny of the experts type of thing, right? So it's just like, and what that's coming from is similar to what we've just already been talking about today, is it's manifesting itself in the centralization versus decentralization space. Like we're seeing so much innovation happening in the more the decentralization space, and just like crypto is kind of my thing. So like I'm always going to point towards cryptocurrency, blockchain, type of stuff. Is we're going to that's where the battle seems.
What about in the atom space? That's all information. In the atom space, it's 3D printing.
Yeah.
But the trick is like they're actually cracking down a lot of controls on 3D printing right now.
Oh, and we're probably going to see. I would not be surprised if we end up seeing a major crackdown happen on cryptocurrency also, like on the ownership of cryptocurrency. I wouldn't be surprised if we start to see something like that happen. Because there's just too much freedom in the space.
Too much unregulated.
Yeah, it's too unregulated,
and that
you can't control it. So the 3D printing stuff is probably 3D printing might be one of the biggest innovations that's happened in the last few years now, just because in the sheer capabilities of what can happen there.
The trick is, how do you get sustainable businesses out of that, creating new things with atom space that can actually operate outside of the controls, or you get a political cultural revolution. Like that's the question. Like, and I don't mean like violent revolution. What I mean is people change their ideas from about what is their acceptable range of opinion, and those ideas start to encompass things like, we don't need to be told by a bunch of managers how to do things that help other people live their lives.
Well, actually, and this might be a really...
And that even if I'm a big business, I still don't need permission from managers to tell people how much I can pay my employees, what I can sell to them, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, this might be a good example, and I think a lot of things that a lot of people would have seen. I was listening to Tim Pool's podcast last night, and he had the gym owner in New Jersey that got cracked down on with COVID fines after they reopened. and they actually reopened following the governor's like guidelines too, which is the crazy thing about that story. But oh shoot, where was I going with this? I just lost it. I had something based off of what you were saying.
Managerial revolution. Making something outside of the current system and rules.
No, I lost it.
Oh man,
no, I lost it.
No.
It had something to do with like the last thing that you just said.
I don't even know what I said now.
Why was I talking about it? Regardless, it's a very interesting story.
Definitely go listen to Tim Pool's podcast. We got an endorsement from No Strings. You're welcome. All 12 listeners, go listen. Thanks, Mom.
But that story is fascinating because like we're seeing of. I think the crackdown of like the centralized nature where you have this management of like the tech elite, the doctor expert types of like these are the codes that we're supposed to follow because of COVID, right?
Yeah, right.
And this is how everything's supposed to go down. And what we saw when somebody tried to follow the codes but still keep their business open after it was closed for like months.
Yeah.
They come in and they get like 80 fines or something like that.
Right.
And they got a legal defense fund, and you actually had the state of New Jersey come in and take like $170,000. It's just straight out of their bank account and just stole their legal defense fund from them.
Oh my god.
But like this is what's happening when you have all these centralized structures. This is what's capable of happening. If you had all these things decentralized, you'd be able to have all these different creative spaces pop up. And right now, it's non-existent.
So decentralization, a large part of this means getting rid of the managers, getting rid of the professional management class, and that's like a power structure. It's not an identity, right? That's the thing that bothers me about the populists is that they're more about the game, not the actual philosophy. They're more about like the fight rather than the end state at times. And what I would recommend is rather than trying to say a class of people is evil, we say we have a positive vision for the future and how people can serve each other's needs better, and we don't need to be centrally planned by technocrats in that case. So on top of that, we better get going.
Yeah.
And hey, I really appreciate everyone listening to the podcast, getting the feedback that we've gotten. We want to keep doing this, keep growing it. I hope that you will like, comment, share this podcast, and that you will help us get the word out. It's funny. I made an old friend the other day, and we can maybe end on this or something like that. And he said, "What?" And I just mentioned, "Hey, I'm doing this podcast now. I'm having a good time with it." He's like, "Well, what's it about?" And I said, "Well, it's about libertarian philosophy, existentialism." and realpolitik analysis. We call it No Strings. And he looked at me with this like, and he was like, well, that's an interesting set of topics. So I hope that Joe's listening and enjoys it, and please, if we can help us spread it, and maybe someday we'll be able to actually make money doing this or something.
That'd be nice. Right now, we're still kind of figuring it out as we go along.
But I'm enjoying it, and thank you for listening.
See ya. Bye. Oh, I'm Kyle Mack, and he's David Herbst.
We're so bad at that.